shoot the altered energy homeostasis, or as a direct signal, you're going to start to get that bad visceral fat that correlates so badly with everything. And also the possibility that the immune system that lives in the gut is going to start to get a different idea about what it constitutes a threat or not. And I'll come back to that in a few seconds. So the periodontal disease is an interesting one because we now know that such changes as I'm proposing that flour and sugar might cause in the upper gut did happen in the mouth. This is a recent Nature Genetics paper where they used the tooth tartar as a time capsule of the bacteria that were in the mouth, 34 human skeletons back from before the advent of agriculture up through to a group of modern Australians who had their mouth bacteria looked at. And the leader of the group, Professor Cooper, said, the composition of oral bacteria changed markedly with the introduction of farming, and again around 150 years ago. With the introduction of processed sugar and flour in the Industrial Revolution, we can see a dramatically decreased diversity in our oral bacteria, allowing domination by caries causing strains. The modern mouth basically exists in a permanent disease state. And there was a paper a couple of years back by the American Heart Association, because there have been a lot of dentists saying, come and get your tooth decay treated, it'll treat your heart disease, it's good for your heart. And the American Heart Association had to put out a paper saying, no, it's not going to treat your heart disease. Both conditions are probably being caused by a third factor. And it may be that these bacteria, as a result of these foodstuffs, is that third factor. And if not in the mouth, if in the mouth rather, why can't that not be in the upper gut as well, as it's only one swallow away? So of course this throws open the Pandora's box that the way we prepare foods and cook them may also have a profound effect on whether our gut bacteria are having this party at our expense. These top slides are from boiling potatoes for 20 to 30 minutes, and the cells are still intact. The organelles inside are different. The starch has turned into a bit of a mush, but it's still within the cells. Whereas here at the bottom, I don't exactly know how Dr. Burgess cooked his potato, but it looks completely different to this. I'm assuming he baked it in some way. You can imagine that if you then further powdered that into potato starch and then reconstituted it at a later date as an ingredient in processed food, you would have a potentially very different reaction of the microbiota to this than they would have to this. So how did we come from, I'm getting the 5-minute card, how did we come from there to here, and why did obesity occur at different stages? Between the Neolithic and the 1800s, I guess the diet would contain coarse flour and bread, but plenty of whole foods as well, so it would have been quite a Mediterranean-like diet. You could expect baseline changes in insulin and blood glucose, small changes in adiposity, an increased risk of Western diseases, but unless you were particularly long-lived past the endemic infectious disease at the time, you may not even have been troubled by stroke or other conditions because people might not have been living it long enough. After the Industrial Revolution, of course, you now get refined sugar and refined flour. And if you were someone who indulged in these things a bit more, you might start to see changes in health in different social classes at this point as well, if they ate more baked goods. And of course, that's when tooth decay shows up. And then finally, after 1970s, we got a time-poor populace eating large amounts of processed foods that are all being formulated to reduce fat and maximize profits. So that's when the all-night, every-night rave started in our guts, and we all became thoroughly leptin resistant. And obviously, the susceptibility at this point is going to be a great determinant in to what extent you develop symptoms. If you've got a good genotype and you've got a diet that still leans more towards this, you might find that you're effortless, your weight control is not so bad. If you happen to be from a non-European background and you, because of your socioeconomic lot in life, you're eating some particularly bad food, you can see how you might end up with a particularly bad, comparatively bad metabolic situation. So what does it explain if it's right? Well, it might explain that macronutrient independence of the ability to eat those high-carb diets or the meat-rich diets, but still have the same metabolic outcomes as long as you ate good, whole, recently alive foods. It might explain how Atkins-like diets are producing weight loss without hunger in Westerners who cut out those foods, but then also with the amount of refined fats and oils, which we know from the powdered mouse pellet study, that refined fats are potentially able to have an effect as well. So that might put some of the limiting factors in low-carb diets. We know that, so it might explain how even if you eat a diet that's 90% good stuff, if you then have a couple of muffins on top of it, you can still be in a comparatively worse situation very quickly. And might explain how small changes with Western imports or slight alterations in agriculture or how you're storing crops and stuff might be able to produce the effects it does. It might also explain how if Europeans have been not only exposed to agriculture for a long time, but because of cold winters may have been more reliant on granary stores of grains for food during the winter. So perhaps it was more likely that Europeans' reproductive fitness was affected or even affected their levels of fertility, and that would lead to us getting a little bit more resistance to it than people from non-European backgrounds who are suddenly being exposed to the full Western diet, but they're obviously being dropped into the deep end. It explains potentially why dental health got so bad when Western foods showed up, and how oral health correlates so well with cardiovascular disease, and how multivitamins, minerals, and fiber don't seem to work fantastically well when taken as supplements, because perhaps the benefits of fruit and vegetables were that they got the nutrients into your gut without starting this gut bacteria party off. So commensal bacteria may also be implicated strongly in inflammatory conditions, as we were in the previous talk. It's been shown that apparently that one of the main inflammatory models that's the mainstay of inflammation work in the periphery, the Carradian-Paul model, simply doesn't seem to work, certainly not to anything like the same degree in germ-free mice. And there's also a spontaneous mouse model, staurosis model, that doesn't seem to spontaneously get off the ground anymore once they're tested in germ-free mice. Anecdotally, and I can personally vouch for this, if you start eating an ancestral diet, it's really commonly reported that autoimmune or inflammatory conditions go either into remission or become substantially attenuated. So I kind of like this research because it would make the microbiota a one-stop shop for an explanation of the effects of these diets. So obviously I'm a big fan of this. I think they're potentially a really, really powerful clinical tool, and right now where we are being so financially strained by increasing healthcare costs, this is a really cost-effective way of potentially improving the health of the population and taking some of that strain out of the healthcare system. Drug use, you prescribe drugs that can work to an extent, and they're going to have side effects, and the older you get closer to rattling. You see some of the people arriving at accident and emergency in Canada, and they're taking 27 pill bottles out of their pocket. If you can allay a lot of those symptoms by getting people to change diet, and the side effects are all good, the patient's just shopping in a different section of the supermarket. So obviously you've got to, the work then is to get people to learn how to cook again, basically, and to learn their way through the maze of how to be eating. So the answer to the odd one out, of course it's smoking, obviously, because there's no way the other two are going to be in there. But the answer the reason why may not be what you think. It's, of course, there's no population on Earth that eats cereal grains and drinks fizzy pop drinks that is free of cardiovascular disease. And of course, the Italians are quite notorious as, well, light smokers is the term that's being used. I think this is an interesting thing, is it sort of, when you compare the effects of grains without smoking versus the effects of smoking without grains, it might give you an idea of the relative health impacts of the two habits. Obviously, smoking and grains and sugar is the stupidest thing, and I'm not advocating smoking in any way. So, many thanks again to the organising committee for kindly inviting me along, and thank you here to my friend Andrew Samis for years of debating dietary theories with me over lunches, and both of our lunches have been getting progressively healthier as a result. Thank you very much.